Hey everybody, what's up from Pokemon Classics? Reminding you all that the classics never go out of style. For this week's video, we're featuring the auctions of the week, another one in the series, and there's some absolute fire coming your way. Seriously, I don't know what it was about these last couple weeks, but a lot of really high-end items, and today we'll be bringing you a selection of some of the best ones. Also, make sure you stick around to the end of the video. In honor of top 10 Pokemon, I like to feature an auction of the week. This week, something a little bit different. Anyway, guys, let's roll into it, starting with some Charizards. Well, I told you guys we'd have some fire this week, and I meant it, and here's some proof. We have a first edition PSA 10 base set Charizard selling for $170,801. Now, this is a card with a very low population of just 124, and if we cut over to Pokedata.io, you'll see that this is an exceptionally low price point for this card given recent sales. Usually this card is sold for at least $200,000, with some sales even as high as $300,000 or $400,000, so I was a little bit surprised by this one. Now, we also had a PSA 9 copy of the first edition base set Charizard sell for $22,800, and a CGC 9 copy in the black label selling for $15,500. Usually you get a bit more of a PSA premium for some of these vintage cards over a CGC. There's also a CGC 9 in the blue label, and this was before CGC changed their labels and changed their standards a little bit, so this one did a little bit better, selling for $20,400. Continuing our Charizards, we have the base set Unlimited in PSA 10 selling for $9,850. And here's one that I don't see come up very often either. It actually has a very low population. That's the base set 2 Charizard. Personally, not a huge fan of base set 2. This one sold for $7,200. In fact, if we take a look at the population report, only 66 copies of this card out there. And this one sold pretty low, again, comparative to what it's done in the past. Moving forward, we got another CGC 10. This time it's the Reverse Holo Charizard from Legendary Collection. Absolutely beautiful card. I personally love this one. $6,000 even on the sale. And capping off the CGC 10s with one more, we've got a Crystal Charizard from Skyridge set, selling on eBay for $9,267. It's another really good looking Charizard card. We also had a PSA 9 Unlimited Charizard sell for $1,184. A Dark Charizard First Edition from the Team Rocket set selling for $687.50. Can't forget about the 50 cents there. And then finally, this one I found amusing, but we have a Shadowless Charizard from base set in a PSA 1 condition. That's poor condition. You can see that this card looks like it's been through hell and back. And this one sold for $610, which I think is a pretty good price considering how damaged it is. Next, let's take a speed run through some of the vintage sales of the week, starting with the starters. We've got Charmander from base set, first edition PSA 10 selling for $787, and the Squirtle gonna upstage Charmander a little bit here, selling for $865 in a PSA 10. And you guessed it, Bulbasaur is the champion of the three here, selling for $1,515. Now that's a far cry from the 30K Bulbasaur memes of 2020, but taking a look at the price graph, you'll see that this card has come down considerably since its all-time highs. Just kind of an interesting thing to look at is how hype can propel a card and how quickly it can come back down to earth. Now, I also wanted to feature the Pikachus, and we've got the Yellow Cheeks Pikachu in a PSA 10 selling for $875. And look at this, the Red Cheek completely mopping the floor with the Yellow Cheeks, selling for $3,600 in a PSA 10. Next, we'll move into a jungle card. This is the Snorlax Unlimited, but if you notice, this is the one that's missing the jungle stamp. This is a CGC 10 Pristine. Quality grade, quality card, selling for $3,056.69. We also have the CGC 10 Gengar. This is one of the chase cards of Fossil, probably this one in Dragonite, and this one sold for $865. Next up, we have one of the most difficult cards to grade in Gym Heroes, and that's Blaine's Moltres. It's also one of the most beautiful artworks out there in the Wizards of the Coast era. Gem Mint 10, first edition, selling for $3,050. Once again, if we take a look at the price chart, this card was doing significantly better, topping out at about the $7,000 mark once upon a time. So a little bit under sale here, but kind of makes sense given the way the market's been moving. We also have Lieutenant Surge's Fearow. This is another one that's pretty tough to grade, selling for $780. Personally, I think that was a pretty good deal for whoever picked up that one. Next up, we have some Gym Challenge with Blaine's Arcanine, first edition PSA 10. One of my favorite cards in Wizard of the Coast, and this one sold for $1,634. Another one from Gym Challenge is Giovanni's Persian, and I believe this is the card that has the lowest population. Might have fluctuated a little bit. There's a couple other ones that are tough, but this one sold for $2,950. In fact, if we go back to Pokedata.io, current population for this card is only 69 copies. And I know that might sound like a lot, but when you're talking about a vintage set that is widely circulated, that's a very low population count. Now, this next one is one that I was personally watching, and that's the first edition Heracross from Neo Genesis in PSA 10, and it sold for $3,550. It's a very difficult card to grade. Now, one that's really popular is the Pichu, also from Neo Genesis in first edition, this time CGC 10, selling for $903. We also had the Lugia from the Neo Genesis set. This time it's a BGS 9.5, selling for $3,250. I think that was a pretty good deal if you're the type of person that collects BGS cards. In Neo Discovery, we had the Tyranitar in first edition, CGC 10, selling for $711. And my favorite set of all time, Neo Destiny, we've got the Dark Espeon in first edition PSA 10, selling for $2,125. Now, if we take a look at the price graph on that one, you'll also see a considerable downtrend over the last couple of years, which I think is unfortunate, but could be great for those collectors out there that are looking at picking up some of these low population cards to add to the collection. There's also a CGC 10 Pristine of this card, and this one did earn a bit of a premium over the PSA 10 copy. This one sold for $2,777.90. These last few cards I put on the list because I personally like them, but we have the Skyridge Gyarados, this time a BGS 9.5, selling for $1,534. Really gorgeous looking card. There's also the 3D looking Gengar EX from Fire Red and Leaf Green in a CGC 10. This one sold for $1,060. Then we've got Arcanine EX, another great looking card, CGC 10, selling for $655. And finally, we'll wrap this up with a Ho-Oh EX, a pristine 10 from CGC, and this one sold for $1,135. Next, let's take a quick break from slabs and talk about some sealed product. Now, this is definitely something you don't see every day, but we have the sale of a first edition base set booster box going for $187,500. We also have the Jungle first edition booster box that sold for $10,312.50. And then we have the Fossil first edition booster box selling for $10,800. Now, this is another one that we don't see hit the market very often, but Fire Red Leaf Green booster box selling for $19,601. This I just found amusing. I used to see these at the store at Kmart and Target and Walmart or wherever when I was a kid, but the Southern Island sealed collection selling for $1,562.50. I wish I would have stocked up on these when I was a kid. Next, we have a sealed case of Sun and Moon Cosmic Eclipse boxes. 6 boxes to a case, selling for $5,300. Now, a singular box of Cosmic Eclipse was also sold. Single box went for $860. We also have a case of Sun and Moon Unified Minds, and this one sold for $3,820. We've got a single box of Unbroken Bonds selling for $625. That's another one of the Sun and Moon sets. Speaking of Sun and Moon sets, we have a single box, just one, of Team Up, one of the more popular sets from Sun and Moon, selling for $2,187.50. Next, we've got another sealed case. This is Brilliant Stars, so a bit more recent. This one sold for $1,025. Then we'll wrap it up with one more sealed case. This time it's a case of Evolving Skies, and this one sold for $3,720. All right, everybody, if you're not wearing your sunglasses yet, you might want to slip them on because these next few items have such a radiant glow to them that you're probably going to want to wear some eye protection. First up, we have an uncut sheet from Fossil set of all the different holographic cards, and this sheet sold for $17,500. If one sheet isn't enough, we also have this sheet that was completely comprised of Machamp cards from base set. This sheet went for $6,875. Now, this one's kind of interesting, but we have the Disco Hollow test print card with Charizard. This one got a CGC 10, and it's autographed by Arita. So, very unique item here. This one sold for $87,975. Now, if that's not enough prototype test cards for you, we also have a set of 3 different beta play test cards that came up for auction, starting with this Venusaur in CGC 8.5. This one sold for $23,750. Next, we have the Blastoise, this time CGC 9. This one sold for $23,125. And as you could guess, the Charizard is next, and this one in a CGC 8.5 sold for $42,500. Really unique cards, but I don't know about you guys, I feel like I've been getting flooded lately with different prototype cards out there on the market. Speaking of some of the early stuff, we've got a Trainer Deck B Blastoise. This actually has the red pattern on the back. And this one was a Mint 9 from PSA, selling for $2,501. Finally, a little bit controversial on this one, but we have this unreleased Tropical Mega Battle card. And this one was $32,500. You'll notice the borders are much larger than they typically would be. So this one just has a grade of authentic. Next, we'll take a look at some of the many modern chase cards out there. And we'll start it off with the Metal Charizard from the Celebrations UPC. This is a pretty difficult card to grade, and in a PSA 10, this one sold for $1,647. Now we can contrast that with the regular Celebrations Charizard in a PSA 10. This one sold for $134, which is the lowest price point that I recall seeing this card go for, which is kind of interesting. Now, one of my favorite looking artworks out of all of the modern series, all the modern era, I should say, is the Test Tube Mewtwo GX. This one sold in a PSA 10 for $900. Another one that I think has some personality to it is the Latias and Latios GX, and this one in a PSA 10 sold for $2,400. This one sold from TCA Gaming. Shout out to Rusty, great person, great seller. Next up, we have the Charizard EX from 151. This card sold for $350. We have one of my favorites. I love the artwork of this one, the Lugia V from Silver Tempest in PSA 10, selling for $326. And then we've got the Rayquaza VMAX. This one's from Evolving Skies in PSA 10, selling for $588.38. Next, we've got Giratina V. This one's from Lost Origin in a PSA 10, selling for $680. Then we've got Gengar. Gengar's a fan favorite out there, and this is the Gengar VMAX. It's the Hungry Gengar. And this one in PSA 10 sold for $660. Lastly, we got to wrap it up with the Umbreon VMAX, and here we have a CGC 10 Pristine. Quality grade for a quality card. This one sold for $1,630.55. We can contrast that with the PSA 10 copy, and this one sold for $1,200 even. So getting a little bit of extra money for that CGC 10 Pristine. Finally, our last category in this recap is dedicated entirely to Japanese cards, and we'll start it off with some holo sets. Now, this first holo set is an entire set of Jungle Holos, all 16 of them in PSA 10, and it sold for $1,750. We also had the same exact thing, but with the Fossil Holos, all PSA 10s, all 16 cards. Mew was only released in Japanese. In English, it was released as a promo, hence the difference. But anyway, this one sold for $2,062.50. We also had an entire set of all the reverse holos from 151, the Master Ball reverse holos, in PSA 10, and this set sold for $5,750. It's a pretty impressive set to collect. Next, we have the Trio from the E-Card promo set in Japanese, the Big Three, the Charizard, the Blastoise, the Venusaur, together selling for $5,160 in all PSA 10. Speaking of all PSA 10s, we've got the 5 Scream cards, and together these ones sold for $7,800 as a completed set. Looking at a few singles, we have the Gengar. This is the Misaki promo. Probably the best one, the one that people want the most, and this one sold for $10,700 in a PSA 10. We also have the 2016 Pikachu Festa card, and this one sold for $7,600. What I like about this is it has the other starters in the background, so it's the perfect mix, bringing together all 4 of the originals. Next up, we have the Flareon Play promo, 30,000 points for this card, and in PSA 10, it sold for $10,500. There was also a CGC 10 Pristine copy that interestingly sold for a little bit less. This one sold for $9,300. So again, there's a little bit of discrepancy there between preferred grading companies, especially looking at like modern chase cards versus vintage chase cards. Next up, we have a Pikachu, and this isn't any ordinary Pikachu. This is the No Rarity Pikachu in Gem Mint 10 condition, hence the premium on this one for $5,280. We also have a Lugia from Neo Genesis in Gem Mint 10 PSA. This one sold for $638. Then we have the Shining Mew, and the reason I highlighted this one is because you can only get this card in Japanese. This one wasn't included in the English version of Neo Destiny. This card in PSA 10 sold for $3,500 even. Next up, we have a Lily, and this is the full art Lily from Sun and Moon, and gotta have at least one waifu in the list, I guess. So this one sold for $7,202. Finally, we have a black label. When there's a black label out there and it's an Umbreon, probably gonna be worth some money. And this one was no exception, selling for $4,270. Well, everybody, thanks for sticking around to the end, and here's your reward. It is the auction of the week in honor of top 10 Pokemon. Let's take a look. Here we have an uncut test print sheet of Magic the Gathering cards on top and 5 copies of the prototype Blastoise down at the bottom. Now these have white backs, and I believe it's been encapsulated and authenticated by CGC. Now, I remember seeing this at Card Party. I'm pretty sure it's the same copy that was in the Heritage Auctions booth at the time, and I was curious how much this would sell for. Well, we have our answer here. It sold for $275,000 even, which on the one hand is a very high price tag, but on the other hand, kind of pales in comparison considering what the individual Protostoise cards have sold for in the past. So I think this is interesting. It's a great piece of history, and hopefully whoever picked it up decides to keep it as a sheet and preserve that history. That'd be my personal preference anyway. Well, guys, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of Auctions of the Week. Let me know if I missed any important auctions down in the comments below. I try to keep track of as many as possible, so that would help me out immensely. Anyway, I'm Pokemon Classics, reminding you all that the classics never go out of style. Till next time, everybody, stay well, have fun, and don't forget to enjoy collecting. That's what this is all about. We'll see y'all with the next video. Catch you later.